Now, after a short break away from this website, it's very easy to get a little bit rusty. And as I picked up where I left off the last time, there were these new tasks that came up. And the one that I solved today was called Rook, which is a chess piece. And there were many ways I could have solved this issue, but I decided to go back to basics and try to solve it in a way that I would have solved it before. So essentially, when you look at a rook and you look at the image that they give you, they're essentially about 5 layers that a rook has. So there's the top, then there's like a smaller line, then there's the body of it, then there's a smaller line, and then there's the base. So I made about 5 divs, and divs are containers or elements in HTML, which in my head is what I'll use as like the container or the shape of the item which I'd like to replicate. So I saw these 5 different layers of this rook. And when I did that, you can also see that within some of those divs, you can make some more divs that will serve as a way to shape the shape, if that makes any sense. A way to contain the shapes you're going to make within those div elements. So in the first instance, which is the only instance where I had to do that, within the first div, I made 5 or 6 other divs inside. So the way in which I saw it, I was like, okay, I see 3 lines, 3 upright lines, which are like the ones that kind of look like fingers you see in the image. So I made 3 of those, and I rounded their corners using the border radius. And then the next part was to make what would be the space in between those 3 lines. So I made a square, and with that square I made the border radius about 20 pixels or 15 pixels, and that served as the space in between those 3 lines. And then as soon as I did that, there needed to be the base, which is to hold all of these 3 shapes together, which will then serve as the connector and the final piece of it. So I then put that at the bottom, and then I rounded the base to just keep it all consistent. And then the second part was pretty much easy. It was a rectangular shape that I made, and then also again I used the border radius in order to replicate that second layer. So that was quite easy. In fact, that second base and the fourth base are pretty much the same, just different widths. Same height and everything, just different widths, same border radius, um, so on and so forth. And then the more interesting part was the middle layer, which was the third part, where essentially it was pretty straightforward. I had two, I had 3 shapes inside, with the second one being the one in the middle, which was a square, but I made sure that I made it as wide as possible so that and my idea was that there were going to be 2 circles on either side, and then I was going to make those circles into the color of the background color, so that when I then put them in the way that I wanted to, it will essentially look I like I replicated the image, but then it was a manipulation that I came up with, but anyway, it sort of did the trick. And the way in which I did that was the previous 2 elements which I described. I had to give them a z index of about 999, which is really important because Z index are essentially layers. Indexes are basically layers, and with that layer you have, if something has a z layer of 10 and everything else has a z layer of maybe 1, the one that has a z index of 10 is going to be on a higher level. So irregardless of whatever's going on, if a shape overlaps another shape, that shape will always remain at the top because it has a much higher z index. So I made sure that these two circles had a much lower z level than the other shapes so that they wouldn't overlap and make it look weird. And then the fourth part I talked about, it's essentially the same as the second layer. And then the base layer is the same as the second and the fourth, with just a minor difference that when you're dealing with border radiuses, essentially, imagine that this is a rectangle. Each each point of the rectangle you can manipulate using the border radius property. And what happened was I gave these top two a much higher border radius than the bottom half, and that allowed it to have a more rounder shape than the one at the bottom, which gave the effect of the one which you'd see in the image. So essentially that's how I went about working with this, and I'm quite happy with the way it turned out. And although I got a 97, I still think it was a pretty high score. And for someone who hadn't done this in a very long time, I was quite happy with it. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Um, in the next couple of days, I don't know. I don't like to give a timeline on these things, but essentially, I like explaining how I come up with these solutions, and if it's of much help to anyone, then it's always a plus because there are many people who like to practice their CSS. And not everyone wants to create a website from scratch and then put CSS. Sometimes you just need something that's a little bit out of routine so that you can still sharpen on your skills and still have fun whilst doing it. So, yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.